Hello, welcome to Rights of Woman. I'm here in London State with Winnie M Li, who this week has won not the Booker Prize with Dark Chapter, which is gorgeously displayed here. So we're here to talk about the book because it's coming out in paperback soon.
Yeah, November 1st.
There we go. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to ask you about, Winnie, was the idea behind the book, because you took a real life experience and turned it into fiction.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask why you decided to do it, how it felt, what changes you made.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I've been a writer my whole life, kind of since the age of 6. And so if you asked me what I wanted to be when I was 6 years old, I would say I want to be a writer and have a book published. Obviously, at the time, I never would have thought that the first book I'd have published would be inspired by my rape, because again, that's something that you never actually think is ever going to happen to you, right? So, but anyway, so as a writer, writing is how I make sense of the world, or how I make sense of life, I suppose. So when I was obviously randomly raped in 2008 by a 15-year-old stranger in a park in West Belfast, it was such a life-changing experience that it seemed to me, I mean, of course it was going to be impossible for me to not write about it. As a writer, how could I live through something this dramatic and life-changing without trying to write about it? So it was inevitable I was going to try to do that. Yeah. Just, I guess the question was, how was I going to do that? Was it going to be memoir? Was it going to be, short form or fiction? And I guess a few weeks after the assault, I was in this weird post-traumatic haze. I was in shock for what felt like, years. And I just remember, sitting down in this, weird hot haze that I was in and writing, a few paragraphs that just already came out, right? And those paragraphs actually are now the prologue of the book. Okay. So I wrote them and then I read them and I'm like, that's actually pretty good. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? And then I was like, okay, well, I mean, that could be the start of a book. So I just remember kind of following that away to the back of my head and thinking I do want to write about this kind of incident from the viewpoint of both victim and perpetrator, because if you're raped in a park by a 15-year-old boy, the question is what had happened in his life that had led him to be that violent in such a way. And a second question I've always had that's haunted me since my assault is, has he ever thought about the impact of his actions on my life? Because I thought about it every day for a long time. So the larger question is, do perpetrators think about the impact of their actions? So I kind of felt the only way to explore that would be through fiction, because I wanted to bring the perpetrator to life as a character and try to invest in with a certain humanity and try to investigate what is the potential life that leads to somebody being that violent at such a young age. So that was where the idea came from, but obviously I had to recover for about 5.5 years and kind of try to rebuild my life before I was at a point where I could approach it as fiction. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you made some changes in the book,
yeah.
Because it goes to trial, which didn't happen in your case.
Yeah.
So did you do research with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the book is obviously written from both points of view. So it's written from the victim's, Vivian's point of view, and then also from the perpetrator, Johnny's point of view. So it moves back and forth. So obviously the major change from my own experience is that you see half of it from the viewpoint of somebody who's not me, or has no relation to me. And then the other major change is that there's a trial. So in real life, my perpetrator pleaded guilty the morning of the trial. And I just remember thinking that, I was shocked again. So again, in the course of a few moments, my life changed because I wasn't going to have to testify. But I also remember thinking at the time, I felt like I'd been robbed of the opportunity to tell my side of the story, even though I then learned that court cases aren't the best way for victims to share their side of the story. So I kind of realized when I was going to write a novel, I am going to have to write a trial, because that's almost what we expect as readers and as audiences of people who, we see TV shows all the time and movies all the time where the big climax is the trial where justice, will be proven right, justice will be achieved. So I kind of felt narratively that's what we would expect. And I also felt like that is the moment where you get to see those 2 points of view and actually put them in comparison side to side with each other in a legal sense. So yes, the trial is entirely made up. And I did a lot of research I sat through a number of rape trials in London and also in Belfast, just to kind of see how they went. And I shadowed a barrister and I spoke to various people that work on the legal side of things in terms of having rape cases. I spoke to a lot of people on the legal side of things that kind of work on rape cases.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit more about you using the perpetrators voice, because when I started reading, I tend to like to read without finding anything that much about a book to start with. So it was a bit of a shock when I got to the point when we get Johnny's voice.
Yeah.
How did it feel to get in the head of someone in that position?
Yeah, so what did you think? I mean, so obviously you were shocked at first, but then, like, what was your kind of emotional reaction to the perpetrator, I suppose?
It was interesting. I used to teach teenagers as well.
Okay, yeah.
So that sort of teenage point of view and what was happening to him, I thought, it was an interesting way of exploring it and seeing, and like you said, it humanised him. And there is that, nothing's black or white, is it? So that was interesting. But yeah, it did make me wonder, as writing about it from your perspective, how that must have felt, whether you could distance yourself from it or whether...
Yeah, I mean, I think, by the time I started writing the book, it was about 5.5 years, 6 years even, after the assault. So emotionally, I mean, obviously the emotions are always going to be there, I think, for any survivor, but I was no longer directly traumatized by the experience. So I think by writing from the perpetrator's point of view, that gave me new insight, I suppose if you can use that word, into this kind of crime. And I suppose at the end of the day, as a writer, you're always trying to just make sense of things, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to make sense of this horrific crime, which had changed my life. So I kind of actually, as weird as it sounds, I kind of enjoyed writing Johnny's sections more than I enjoyed writing Vivian's, because with Vivian's section I was just reliving like the worst episode of my life, right? Yeah. And that for me wasn't hugely productive. But obviously I've written that because I think it's important for people to know the impact of this kind of crime on victims. But for Johnny, at least I felt like I was doing something new, where I was kind of exploring new territories. It was a little bit more creative and more productive for me. Yeah. And I also, there was a fair amount of dialect in there, so for me it was more interesting as a writer to try to experiment with language and try to see how do we show differences in, in class and in and in education through the language that we use for different characters. Yeah,
it's interesting you pick up on that, because that's something I'm interested in as well. People who read my blog regularly will know that I read a lot of working class writers. Obviously I'm from Barnsley, you can tell by my accent, so I'm really interested when people use that in their writing. So it's a conscious decision to show his background.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a writer who would like to be considered literary on some level, I don't think you could take two characters who are so fundamentally different from where they come from in the world and use the same exact language for both of them, right? Yeah. So, I'm not writing in first person in the book, I'm writing in close third, but I still felt that in close third you can still use language in a different way. So yeah, for me it was quite important. And so there was a lot, what books did I use? I mean, The Butcher Boy by Patrick McCabe, Roddy Doyle, so I mean some of Ross Raisin's work, I mean that's not from Ireland, but I did look at a number of writers who use dialect to kind of capture I guess the mindset of a teenager, but then also a certain regional kind of dialect as well.
Yeah, and there's that sort of balance in that. I tend to find when I'm reading that sort of work that there's a balance between getting the accent but ensuring that anyone can read it and understand it, essentially. Yeah. I think there was one word I had to look up, and I don't know whether I can pronounce it right. Boer?
Bjor. So, that's an Irish word. Actually, I think it's from a traveller origin, but it's an Irish word to refer to a girl or a woman. In Korea, a lot of times it's used to refer to like an attractive young woman. But Bjor. So, bizarrely for the audiobook producer asked me, like, how is this word pronounced? I'm like, I don't actually know. So I had to Google that and look up YouTube and look at various people speaking Bjor and be like, I think there's some regional variations. Sometimes it's Bjor, sometimes it's Bjauer. But for me, it was interesting to try to pick out certain words and pepper them into Johnny's sections just to make that distinction in terms of where he's coming from.
Great. I wanted to ask about Vivian and the way that she's portrayed as travelling through the world. So she's travelled before. You get these incidents at the beginning where she's been to Germany and other places, and then obviously she's going for a walk in the park. Yeah. And to me, there was this theme about women's freedom and the way that women are allowed or not allowed to move throughout the world. Can you talk a bit about
and I'm glad you asked me that, because a lot of people don't ask, and that for me that's kind of at the heart of the book, right? I mean, so Vivian's very similar to me. There are some differences between us, but I wanted to actually keep her to be quite similar to me, because I was making up Johnny, and that was kind of a huge leap for me as an author, from an imagination point of view. I'm like, okay, well, the other character might as well have her. I may as well just like kind of keep her similar to me, just because it's less work, I suppose. So for me, I love traveling, and I've loved traveling from a young age, and even before I was able to travel on my own, I was just quite fascinated by different worlds and different countries and cultures. And then when I finally was old enough to travel, I started traveling on my own, and it still is kind of a huge sense of joy for me. Like, I love exploration and discovery and going to new countries. So you'd kind of think as a woman, like, living in this day and age, that's fine, if you have the access to travel and if you have like the will to do that, then go ahead and do it, right? Nothing should hold you back. And then obviously in 2008, here's me as a fairly empowered woman. I'd been to loads of countries before on my own, and then I come across this individual, a 15-year-old boy, and I'm assaulted and raped when I'm in a park on my own. So that pretty much robbed me, I suppose, of my confidence in traveling through the world. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at in writing Dark Chapter was to kind of dramatize that experience of being a woman who thinks like you're empowered and you can move through the world. Partly because of your education, and also partly just because of the person you are, and then suddenly to come across this obstacle, this wall that prevents you from doing that and completely destroys your sense of self and your confidence. So yeah, I mean, I think we do move through the world, and it took a while for me to realize that I'm not a man, and so people are gonna react to me in a different way. So even though I think okay, I'm in Germany, I can get around in German and stuff, I'm always gonna look different. So I mean, some of it's a race thing, but then obviously some of it's a gender thing, and so I'm just gonna elicit a different reaction as a woman than if I were a guy. And I often think about that hike I did in April 2008 when I was raped, and I often say, well, if I was a 6'1" white guy, I'm pretty sure I would have been raped by a 15-year-old boy, and I would have had a totally different life. I mean, I would have had a totally different life from the beginning anyway, but that, for me, is what is fundamentally unfair sometimes about, just being a woman, and, we are exposed to more threat and more danger because of just the fact that we're women and we're moving through the world. And I'd like to think that's going to change in the future, but, I kind of learned that as sort of a sad lesson, and, I suppose all the work I do is to try to challenge that in some ways.
Yeah. I want to talk about as well, you also consider the idea of shame. So Vivian talks quite a lot about the fact that he was just a kid. There's a point where she sort of questions what to tell her friends and then does tell them, but is worried about reactions, and then there's a moment in court and she's like, how should I behave? I think it's just a general question about women being made to feel shameful about things that men have done to them. Essentially.
And I think Vivian is she's a quite self-confident character. She's 29 when the assault happened, so she's old. I mean, she's a working professional by that point, and she's old enough to know that what happened was not her fault. And yet, I think for any victim of something like that, you're always going to think, well, what could I have done to prevent that, right? Because something like rape or something like that kind of random trauma is so out of the blue that we're used to thinking we move about the world and we do things, and if something bad happens, that may come as a result of something that we've done, when in reality sometimes you just cross paths with a predator and suddenly you're a rape victim and you have to rebuild your whole life, and has nothing to do with what you've done. So Vivian really kind of on some level questions her role and could she have done anything differently. And I think she realizes quite early on that she couldn't have, but I think for a lot of other victims, it is a very different story, particularly if they're assaulted by somebody they know. So that element of self-blaming and the shame that comes with it, it's hugely destructive for a lot of victims and survivors. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
There's a moment in the novel as well, you just made me think about that point in the novel where all these people start coming forward as well and saying it happened to me too.
Me too, right? But that's it's obviously it's not just today, in late October 2017 that people are coming forward. There've always been, I mean, if we look at the statistics of how many women are affected by some form of sexual assault, it's a lot. It's generally 1 in 5 women is going to be a victim of at least an attempted sexual assault or attempted rape even. I mean, in real life, I decided quite early on, I'm just going to tell my friends what happened because, my life is so drastically changed that I can't really come up with a decent explanation except for the truth, right? And on the other hand, like, why should I also have to hide the truth, right?
Yeah.
So I told my friends quite early on, and then in real life, a lot of my female friends would say, well, it actually happened to me too, or happened to my sister or my mother, or my cousin if it wasn't actually to them. And then that's when I started to realize how prevalent it was. And the strange thing was, some of these women I'd known for years, but they only started telling me then. I'm like, well, why haven't we spoken about this before when it's such a life-changing experience? So,
yeah, and we've just touched on the hashtag Me Too.
Yeah.
We're filming this about 10 days after all the revelations have started to come out about Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
There have been revelations about other men since then. Do you think we're at a tipping point where things are changing for women?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tipping point. I mean, it's not like once all these stories come out, like, things are just automatically going to change for the better. Like, you actually need to make some systemic changes in terms of how institutions are structured. But we're at a tipping point, certainly in terms of, I think, people, women, but also men are affected by this issue as well, feeling like they're allowed to share the truth of what happened to them, or that people are willing to listen to them. And certainly, if we look at all the people who have used hashtag Me Too, you realize it's really prevalent, and people that you never thought or considered as being victims, like strong women, they still are on the receiving end of some form of sexual harassment or assault. So I think it's a tipping point in terms of the world, or certainly the Western world, realizing how prevalent these experiences are. But I mean, things aren't going to change just as a result of that. Like, we need to actually change policy and change the way institutions are structured, change reporting opportunities, change like the way the legal system works for, I think, things to really move forward.
Okay. Other exciting thing that's happened this week, we mentioned at the beginning, is that you've won at the Guardian's Not the Book Prize.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, very exciting. How's that been, and how's the reception of the book been generally?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, like, I've been, even before the Not the Booker thing, this thing for any author, just putting yourself out there, putting your work out there is terrifying on some level, especially because it's something you've worked on for so long, and then you put it out there and you're like, people may hate this, and then I will have just wasted years of my life. And then for me, obviously, like, it's about my rape, so it's incredibly personal. I've invested, like, so much of my own personal, I suppose, energy and soul into writing this book, that, it was quite terrifying to have it out there. So, and then, but the hardback came out June 1st, so there's been a really good reception in general. And then with the Not the Booker Prize, once I got shortlisted, I just realized, like, oh, this is great, like, more people know about the book, but then you're like, oh, actually, that means, like, more people are going to read it, and some of them may hate it, right? So,
Not the Book is quite brutal sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Comments as well.
So Sam, the critic, is particularly brutal. I mean, but he actually gave me a good review. But then also the people that write these comments can be brutal without even having read the book, and then you just so I started reading some of the comments, I'm like, yeah, I can't. None of them were hugely derogatory towards me, but at the same time, I'm like, this is like really scary as an author, right? Like, here's something I've written, like, that's, really personal to me, and I think it's a decent, like, piece of work, but some people are just, like, slamming it without having read it. So that was, on one hand, terrifying, but then I actually wasn't expecting to win. Like, I thought, okay, it's great to be shortlisted, but then with the vote, I ended up winning the public vote. I mean, I do have, a lot of supporters out there, I think partially because this issue is so important and so topical. But then I actually wasn't expecting to win a judge's vote, but then winning the public vote and one judge's vote actually, put me over the edge as a winner. So that's been incredible. And then I've literally just been spending so much time just, like, retweeting tweets as a result of winning. So it's like, okay, now hours of my life have gone by and I'm retweeting tweets. So, but it's been crazy. Like, now apparently there's, like, an article in the biggest Taiwanese newspaper tomorrow, which is being run about me. So now we might get a Taiwanese or a Chinese language deal. So there's kind of all these different, like, ripple effects you don't even actually know about, but that's great. I mean, because it's not even just about me as an author, it's more about the book being an opportunity for people to learn more about these issues and to kind of understand in greater detail kind of the human experience of sexual assaults.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions to finish off then. Can I ask what's next for you then? Are you writing anything else? What other work are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted to be a writer my whole life, right? So, I have like 3 other ideas for novels that I'd like to write, but I'm pretty sure I know what the next one is going to be, so I'll start that in 2018. Yeah, and it's historical and it's set in London, and that's all I'm going to say right now. So
exciting.
Yeah.
And you're working on a PhD as well?
I am, yeah, which is related to this topic. So I'm looking at how social media is being used by rape survivors to share their stories, which we have seen in abundant evidence this week with hashtag #MeToo. So yeah, I mean, I do believe that social media is kind of changing the landscape in terms of how survivors and victims are able to come forward with their stories. I guess I'll be interviewing a number of survivors to find out what was their journey towards using social media. Is there something specifically about social media that makes it easier to share your story rather than telling somebody face to face or calling somebody? So
yeah, that would be interesting, because I think one of the things that comes across the book as well is how relentless it is that Vivian has to retell a story again and again and again and again. So that idea that you could just get it out there.
Yeah.
On one blog post or...
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, like, the truth of the matter is if you're a victim and you need help from the public services, from victim support or from rape crisis or from the police, like, I mean, obviously you can't get help until you tell your story, but you're so in shock and so traumatized that actually the telling of the story is a huge burden. So, and then obviously you have to tell in court, so it's, that telling and the retelling of the story is hugely burdensome. So, which is bizarre because I've now then spent like 2 years running this, and now I talk about it all the time in interviews. But and I suppose if you think about it, it's about how do you as a victim or as a survivor gain mastery over the story, right? Because right after the assault, right after the trauma, like, it's a burden to tell the story, and it's overwhelming too. But I guess for me, over the past sort of 9.5 years, it's been a process of gaining mastery over it. And I guess you could say by writing a novel inspired by or writing fiction, that was a way of me gaining control over an experience, which at the time was the very definition of me having no control. So, Okay.
And last question I ask everyone, because my blog's about female writers. So have you read anything by a female writer recently that you'd recommend us to read?
Yeah, there's a book called The Shore by Sara Taylor, which, have you read that?
Yes, I have.
I thought it was brilliant. It was brilliant, right? And I just was literally at the local library at my parents', and I'm just like looking at the shelves. I'm like, I remember like reading about this book, and so I read it, and I had no idea what to expect, but I just thought it was brilliant, just in terms of like the imagination she had, in terms of spanning 3-4 centuries, and then also looking at different characters from a family tree and telling each chapter from a different perspective of one of those characters. And also she really addresses gender issues in quite important ways as well. So
fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
It's always nice to know when you like. Although I quite like it when I get recommendations as well that I've not read before, and I'm like, something to add to the pile. Right, if you are watching this on YouTube, down below there is a link to my review of Dark Chapter on the blog, and there are links below to buy if you're on the blog. Well, you can go to YouTube if you want, or you can just watch this where it is, but I would totally recommend this book. It's absolutely fantastic. It sounds odd to say that it's compelling, but it's absolutely compelling, even though it's quite traumatic reading at the same time.
Thanks, but the one thing I want to add is that, because a lot of people are like, ooh, I don't want to read that, because it's scary, but I mean, it doesn't end on a down note. I mean, it's called Dark Chapter, and I guess I wrote it because as a victim survivor, I felt it was important to show kind of the path to recovery, and not just show that this is the trauma and this is the damage. It's like, this is the damage, but this is the possible way of moving forward. So, so it's dark and compelling, but you're not gonna, you're not gonna feel like it's something awful at the very end. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you for joining me, Winnie.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for inviting me.